Hi, I've got two stories I want to tell you from a spiritual perspective from my time on the Pacific Crest Trail. The first one was one I actually recorded one night in my tent. I was on the California Aqueduct, and it was just it means just a super lot to me. It's what God did for me one day, one specific day, and I remember recording it that night. It's just very dear to me. It's a few ways that God very practically either answered a specific prayer in a very specific way, or that He just kind of worked something out that was really bothering me, or really that I really needed practically. The second story really is the to be honest, it's the true reason why I am off the Pacific Crest Trail. In my previous videos, I talked about getting sick in the Sierras, and that is absolutely true. I was so physically sick that it was really, man, I cannot tell you how bad physically I felt. But there is a different spiritual story behind it. And if you're not a person of faith, it may not make sense to you. If you are, I bet it's going to completely resonate with you. So it's taken me, I think I've been home 3 or 4 days now, and there's times when I've told the story just to the few people I know I'm here that I just get so emotional, to be honest. I'm really hoping I can tell it without being emotional, but there's times I've just absolutely wept. And so here we go. Okay, so I try not to get real preachy on these because not everybody who's watching this is a believer like I am. But I want to tell you 3 very specific ways that God answered some prayers or did some things for me today that were great. I was really feeling like I needed more calories. That's always a big issue. I came down, and there was a guy named Jim with his van set up, a general contractor from LA, drove several hours, and had breakfast burritos, had fruit, had sodas, and I just had really needed more calories. I knew that, and I was heading for a place called Hikertown, and I wasn't really sure they actually had food there, and they don't, by the way. And when I got there, I found that out. But I just was feeling I needed some more calories, and so that was just an absolute godsend that I had no idea was coming. The second thing is Sunday. This is Monday, the 27th. Excuse me. Sunday, I stayed sheltered in place. The weather was really bad, and felt like it didn't feel good the day before, and thought it was a good move. But as Sunday rolled along and I sat there in my tent listening to the wind howl and the rain, I just wondered, did I make the right decision? Should I have got down off the mountain and just braved it and suited up? And so there was a guy camped near me, an older guy, and he Sunday afternoon, he came and kind of yelled, "Hey, Mac, how you doing in there?" He said, I'm too cold. He was going to do the same thing. He said, I can't get warm. I'm going to get off the mountain. And he was heading south, by the way. I'm heading north. So when I got down to Hikertown, met the gentleman that kind of runs the place and was talking with him. And I didn't stay there because it was 2 o'clock and I wanted more miles. As I was leaving, he yelled, "Hey, be safe, Mac Truck." And then I heard a guy from a distance say, "Mac Truck, is that you?" And sure enough, the guy came walking up, and it was a guy that was camped near me. And he said, he goes, "It was horrible." He said, "I made the wrong decision. It was an ice storm." He said, "I had to turn around and go north instead of south just to get off the mountain. And it was just really bad. Had a really bad night." He said, "So I think," he said, "you made the right choice." He goes, "I didn't." And that absolutely blessed me because I just so felt like maybe I didn't make the right choice to stay sheltered in place, and felt like I wasted a day. But it was the right choice. It was the right thing. The weather was horrible. And even this morning, it wasn't great, but it wasn't like it was yesterday. And then the last thing was, I'm walking the aqueduct, the LA aqueduct. It's windy as completely exposed, flat desert land. And I said, Lord, I need a place to shelter. I'd already kind of thought, I wouldn't be able to use my tent. I might just have to keep the top off of it because the wind's so bad, the rainfly won't stay on. Or just cowboy camp, which I really did want to do. I mean, there's critters out here. So I'm walking along. and I was going to maybe do a couple more miles, but I looked over and there was a grove of like those Joshua trees. And I thought, I wonder. So I stepped over behind them, and sure enough, it was like a dead calm spot. So I'm sitting here in my tent, and there's a little bit of wind, but at one point I thought, did the wind stop? If you walk past this grove of trees, it's howling. It's amazing how calm it is right here. So, and on top of it, there's a little bit of dark clouds, so I don't know if I'm going to get some sprinkles, but all I know is I'm in my tent in the middle of this wide open plain, kind of sheltered behind some Joshua trees. It's picturesque as could be. And so I got a good calm spot. So that was 3 ways God just really either answered prayers for me today, or just took care of some things that I didn't know how they would work. So they were just really great blessings for me. I wanted to pass those on. I was taking a 0 day into Tehachapi, and this is the start of the story of me coming home. I was taking the 0 day into Tehachapi, and I went to, that evening, I decided to go to the movies and go see Aladdin, because I was done with all my work. I didn't want to sit around the hotel room, and I don't really party at the bars with a lot of the other hikers. So I decided to go see Aladdin. Sounded fun. So as I was in watching the movie, just before it started, and then the whole first half of the movie, I had this still small voice that basically said it's time to go home. And the first half of the movie I just completely wrestled with. I mean, it wouldn't let me go. It wasn't like a little voice. It got stronger. And halfway through the movie or so, Aladdin is, this has really nothing to do with it, I don't think, but Aladdin and Jasmine are running from the police basically, and they're on this rooftop, and they they swing across on this stick thing, and she has a hard time doing it, and Aladdin looks at her and says, "You can do this." And I remember thinking, that's a voice from God. I can do this. I have no idea why I'm feeling this way. As I left Tehachapi the next day, I had an 8-mile stretch between Willow Spring Road and Highway 58, which was kind of normal. But when I crossed over Highway 58, I had this just overwhelming feeling like you're supposed to stop. Highway 58, there's a bus that comes there. You could get the bus and you could take it back to Tehachapi, make your way to Bakersfield, get on Amtrak and go. And I'm like, that's ridiculous. Why would in the world would I go home? I have no desire. My whole goal for this Pacific Crest thing, the overriding goal for me has been to finish this thing. More than anything, I didn't even care about the experiences as much as I want to finish this thing. And that whole day as I climbed, I had a real hard hill to climb. As I climbed it, it nagged at me all day. It also nagged at me the second day just the same. I remember thinking, okay, you're a day out, but you could still just turn around and get back to 58. And it just ate at me, and it bothered me mentally all day. So after a couple days on the trail, back on the trail, I was kind of at the point of no return, and I had to meet up with Ron and Bill anyway. And so there's no sense in having that thought, because it really didn't matter. I had to get to that next point. So the last day of that 5-day hike from Tehachapi to Willow Spring, as I got up and I was going to meet Ron and Bill, I remember thinking, you got to ride. There's no reason you can't get back home. It's time to stop. And I remember arguing with, really it was God at the time. I didn't think it was him as much as it was just a voice in my head. But so I've had time to process it. I remember thinking, but if I do that, part of me was ready to do that, to be honest. If I do that, then I failed, and people are going to know I failed, and that's going to be something I have to live with and struggle with. And I remember a voice saying basically in my head that, so the only reason you're doing this is so that people don't know you failed. And I was kind of like, no. I mean, yes, but no. Really, I got to finish this thing. That's been the goal from the very beginning, is I got to finish this thing. So even though, yes, that played in, but so the only reason you're not doing this and not changing course is because people will know you failed. That was the voice. So when I was in Lake Isabella with Ron and Bill, I talked with Ron and Bill, just had great talks with them about, trail life and what it meant. And I think I told Bill about, having my failure speech at one point, but I was able to shake it off and get back to normal. The other thing was finishing the desert section and getting to Kennedy Meadows was a big deal. 700 miles, I mean, that is just a big deal to get to the end of that thing. And I was 50 miles away, so I don't care what happened. I was finishing that section, and so I soldiered on. It was 2 long days and then 1 short day, and that short day, as I was coming into Kennedy Meadows, I started not feeling good. It was minor, to be honest, but the next voice, or the next thing I feel like, in retrospect, God said was, it's time to stop. And I would say, no, it's not, because that's not our plan. And I felt like God said, so you're saying I can't change your plan? And it was like, no, this is what we agreed on. This is what I've trained for. I spent money for. And I felt God say, so you're saying I can't change your plan? And if I'm going to be honest, my answer was, no, you cannot change my plan. This is our plan. This is our plan, Lord. And so I coasted into Kennedy Meadows. When I was at Kennedy Meadows, I feel like that voice became a lot clearer about going home. And Tanya and Paul were going down to Disneyland. And I remember thinking, all I got to do is, I think it was Friday we coasted in, and Saturday. They were going down Sunday, Monday, coming back Tuesday. I thought, really, you just got to spend a few days here hanging out, and they can pick you up on the way by, and it'd be great, and it'd be what you should do. And I remember thinking, there's just no way. I'm at the Sierras. This is what I have been looking forward to. And to be honest, anybody who competes to PCT this year, in my opinion, going straight through, not flip-flopping up like a lot of people are doing, but going straight through, has major bragging rights. And I'm up for the challenge, and I wanted all of that. I wanted experience, I wanted the bragging rights, I wanted to complete, I wanted to all of it. But I feel like if you're a parent and you've had this experience where you've told your kid, I'd prefer you not do that. Hey, don't do that. Hey, that's not a good thing to do. And then you get to the point where you go, look, you draw that line and you say, if you cross over this line now, there's going to be consequences. So in retrospect, I think that was where I got to with God. I think the first part, I don't think it was disobedient for me to not stop. I think it was just God prepping me for the change of plan, change of His plan. When I got to Kennedy Meadows, I felt like it changed. If I'm going to be honest, I feel like that was where God drew the line in the sand for me and said, it's time to come home. I'm changing your plans. And but determined Dave kept going on, because I don't want to quit. And so I soldiered on. As I headed into the Sierras, as I've said in my previous videos, is that each day I got progressively sicker. And I cannot express enough that what I was doing, I'm sure a lot will say just altitude sickness or whatever, but what I was doing was nothing new than I've been doing for almost 2 months, climbing hills up and down. It was no more altitude even at that point than I'd had. I had no more weight in my thing. I'd been eating as much, or actually more. I was at that point trying to eat more just to beef up my calories. And so you could easily say from a non-spiritual point that was just just a physical thing. But each day I got progressively sicker. It was almost like from the point I crossed that line, each day God dealt with me a little bit harsher. That's what I feel. It's important to say at this point, I think God speaks to us in many different ways. Sometimes it's through people, sometimes it's through circumstances. He reveals stuff to us in His Word. He uses sermons, He uses worship. He speaks to us. For me, a lot of times there's a still small voice. Here's what I call it. I call it my gut feeling. I had this gut feeling this is what I'm supposed to do. And it's not always logical, by the way. It doesn't follow that necessarily, but I'm old enough now and I've been a believer for long enough that for me, I recognize generally when God's, sometimes it takes getting there a little bit, but I can recognize this is God's voice. But he uses all those different ways to communicate with us. One way he used for me at this point, because at this point I was pretty sure I was supposed to go home, but man, I got to climb Whitney. I am almost here. I've walked 750 miles to get to Whitney. And I want to go through Forester Pass because it's an epic snow year, man. That's some major bragging rights. And I'm a bit of a conqueror, to be honest. I wanted that. I wanted it. So, on the third day, I think God sent a messenger for me. And as I've said in the previous video, it was a girl going southbound who said, "Are you climbing Whitney?" We said, "Yes." She said, "For what it's worth, I climbed Whitney. It is dangerous, the sketchiest thing I've ever done in my life, and I would tell you not to do it." In retro, and I'm going to tell you, when she told me that, it bothered me the rest of the day. It just stuck in my conscious. It bothered me. There's something about the way she said it, some of the language she used. To be honest, even the way she looked, there was just something about her saying, if it was me, I would not climb Whitney. And when I said, "But you did," she said, "Yes, I did, and I'm leaving." It was the most dangerous thing I've ever done. It really hung with me. It was really something about it. So on the fourth day, when we made it to the base of Whitney, that little base camp there, and I laid in my tent at 3 in the afternoon, I can tell you from 3 in the afternoon to 3:30, which I was supposed to be sleeping to rest up to climb, I could not sleep. And I prayed in earnest because I felt so physically bad. "Lord, what do I do?" Within 2 hours, I knew I had to turn around and go back. But that was just, okay, I'm sick, I have to go back. So the next interesting part just in this prayer, this journey, was that what to do. Do I go through the Whitney portal? Do I go through Forester Pass? Do I turn around and go home? And I'm going to tell you, I at one point begged God to tell me what to do. "Lord, what is it I'm supposed to do to get out of this?" And what I think is interesting is, I feel like God never gave me an answer. Why is that? I have no idea. But one thing I would say, God is not a genie where you rub the lamp and he comes out and he grants your wish. I feel like God just never, and I don't think it was punishment. I don't know why, but I feel like God never really gave me an answer of which direction I was going to go. I made the logical decision to go backwards because it was just simply logical, to be honest. It was just seemed like the best choice. Although I got to tell you, I hated it. The idea of going backwards for a guy that likes to conquer things, an idea of it felt like retreat. It was retreat, but but God never said. I never got a clear answer in my soul that said, do this. It just was the logical thing I needed to do. The next thing I wrestled with God in that tent was the whole idea of the change of course, and my pride of basically saying, "Well, I failed." And but as I wrestled that through, it really became apparent to me that it was my pride, that God had really changed my plan, and that it was my pride that was keeping me from going home. Part of me was really ready to go home. You know, I discovered I didn't love hiking all that. It was great. I love the adventure, but I just didn't. You know, some of those guys could just sit there and look out over the views, and it just fed their soul. For me, it didn't feed my soul quite the same. I enjoyed the challenge. I enjoyed the adventure, but you know, so part of me was really ready to go home. But I really wrestled with, okay, those two things: the idea of I'm failing, and that's my pride, and God's changed my plans. When I came to the point where I really realized that God had changed my plan and that it was pride and it was time to move out, and I can tell you exactly when that was. It was 3:30 in the morning, because the moment I settled that, I fell asleep. And so
that was when I came to the point where I said, this is pride, and God has changed my plan, move on. I became completely at peace, and it's hard to explain. I mean, I just kind of let down, and I fell asleep, and I was ready to go. I was looking forward to the next morning, getting out of there. I knew, unless God made me feel better all of a sudden, I just knew it was going to be one of the hardest days of my life. I was right. It was miserable getting out of there. God, even though I came at peace with that, God did not take away the physical torture that I had to get out of. But I told myself, if I get down off this mountain safely and I go to the doctor and there's something wrong, I still have to tell you in this video that, it really was God that changed my plan and not just the physical thing. So that was my promise to God, that even if there's something desperately wrong and I have a great excuse where I wouldn't have to tell everybody all this, I still was going to tell everybody all this. Finally made it down off the mountain, and on the way to the doctor to get checked out, on the way to the hospital, I remember telling Tanya, I said, I know exactly what's going to happen. I'm going to get to the doctor, they're going to draw blood, they're going to do x-rays, and I'm going to find that nothing is wrong. That's what I think is going to happen. Even though what I felt on the mountain was real. I mean, I hurt so bad. But I became convinced that it was not a physical issue. It was a spiritual issue. And I mean, it took me a few days to recognize that, but I realized that the farther I got where I crossed that line, where God said, do not cross this line, the worse I got. So that is a spiritual perspective of why I really did leave the Sierras. I did really leave the Sierras from just a human standpoint, because I felt horrible. But really the reason I'm not returning to the Sierras is this very issue, is that God's changed my plan. I have no idea. You look for a reason. I don't know. I looked at, was there an avalanche? Did somebody die? Was it, did he save me from something physical? And nothing that I could see. In fact, the guy I was hiking with texted me 3 or 4 days afterwards and said, hey man, just didn't get to say bye, and we made it through. And I asked how it was, and he said, extremely challenging is what he said. It was extremely challenging, but they made it through safe, and I know I would have too. And so that's my story. That's the spiritual perspective of why I left and why I decided not to go back. And I don't know, it's good to be home. It's good to get back to my normal life, and we'll see what God does through it. I may never know, or I may know down the road, but I would encourage you, man, if you're wrestling with God on something, just keep wrestling through. The process is really important. And maybe you'll be better than me and you'll recognize it and say yes right away. Okay, Lord. But I suspect a lot of you are a bit like me, and you've got to wrestle it through. And I'm here to tell you, I think that's okay, especially if you come out the other end. But man, God loves you. He's got great plans for you. We just don't always know from our human perspective what it is. But listen to that voice of God and obey it.